Hi, and welcome back to the State of Healthcare podcast, or the SOH as we're calling it. Last season, we learned about things from the health provider's perspective. So we learned about our system and kind of some of the frustrations of why it's not necessarily broken, right? It's just doing what it says. We treat and treat. We don't necessarily try to prevent illnesses. We don't try to be proactive for patients. So unfortunately, what we've led to is a system that's not necessarily servicing or providing the actual care that it's supposed to be doing in the first place. This season, we're going along from the journey as the patient perspective. So I'd like to kind of combo. If you haven't listened to season 1, always go on back. But what we're going to be learning is what can you do as a patient? So here we're going to be exploring various conditions, some common, some not so common, and what the people have gone through on their journeys from here. So join us this season as we learn what you can do as a patient to take your own healthcare into your hands in the state of healthcare. Hi, and welcome back to season 2 of the State of Healthcare. This season, we are actually focusing on patients. So last season was amazing practitioners. Again, I always say, if you didn't listen to last season, go back because everybody had some really good lessons and some things that they learned in the world of healthcare, and just some things for people to pay attention to. But this season is actually about patients and different conditions and things that they've gone through and what the patient experience is like. So this is your season. So we're going to actually start from here, and we're going to introduce Anna. And thanks for being with us today. So I'm going to actually let you tell a little bit of your story.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's interesting, honestly, how we met at yoga class, and I started kind of telling you about some of the issues that I was having. And the reason I had gone back to yoga is because I was just kind of trying to learn how to relive in the body that I have since COVID, because I'd had such a struggle since COVID. So my boyfriend went to work like he normally does during COVID. We both were working in jobs where we didn't have an option for work from home. So he went in one day and was exposed by somebody who was asymptomatic, and he came home and was asymptomatic. And then of course, everybody else got COVID. So, and that was at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
So this you were at the start.
The very start of it. So it was a very early strain of COVID. So if you can imagine, now we've been dealing with this for 3 years.
Right. Okay.
But we both had COVID at the exact same time, had the same strain. Neither one of us were to the point of hospitalization, but I definitely had more severe symptoms during COVID. But coming out of COVID, people talked about you would lose your taste and smell. That was a symptom of COVID. So I remember when that happened to me, I thought, oh my gosh, this is weird. I think I have COVID. So I went to taste a sweet tart, and because I thought, what's a bold taste that, I should be able to know, like, not that I eat a lot of candy, but that's something you would really recognize. So I ate it. It was kind of fine. So I'm like, oh, I must be fine. But then after that, nothing. I lost my taste. I lost my smell. And that's the symptom that I've maintained for the last 3 years. It's kind of come and gone. It's changed a little bit. But for the last 3 years, I've suffered from this thing that's called parosmia. So it's like distorted smell, or anosmia, which is missing smell. And considering taste is about 80% smell, I've also had a really horrible effect on my taste. So that's just been what I've been dealing with for the last 3 years.
Well, and didn't you also say that sometimes like things will now be like a distorted?
Very distorted.
Right.
So I should say for about 2 years, it was consistently bad, just the same bad. And it kind of started getting better. And then now with allergy season, I've been fighting a sinus infection. It's back to probably 30% of what it was at its worst. So back to the distorted smell. When it first started, the distorted smell, and I should say that I belong to some support groups, and this is commonly reported. And I'm not a healthcare professional. I've done a lot of really wacky things trying to like
which
remedy.
We can talk about. It's
Yeah,
totally
for
fine.
sure. That I've tried to remedy this situation, but when I say these things, they're commonly reported. So I have a shared experience with thousands of people coming out of COVID who've had a similar experience. But one of the first distortions was a constant smell of cigarettes. Or something similar to that. I could not pinpoint. We went through and changed every air filter. We cleaned all the carpets. Cleaned everything, and never could I get rid of the smell of cigarettes. And we're not smokers. We don't, really have family or friends that smoke. And even if
Uh,
we did, they wouldn't smoke inside. So,
right.
I mean, it was just a constant. I could not get rid of it. Everything
Mhm.
tasted like cigarette smoke. Everything smelled like cigarette smoke, and it would not go away. And that was the
Uh,
first sign of kind of this persistent issue that I had. And then after that, it was kind of like, and I don't know how I know this, it's just the closest thing I can equate to, but like rotting garbage or rotting
um,
flesh, like just
oh gosh.
a horrible,
Mhm.
horrible smell.
Mhm.
So imagine somebody puts a plate of food down in front of you and it smells
Like
like hot
rotten.
garbage, or
Yeah.
or
Okay.
like rotting
Mhm.
flesh. And
Mhm.
again, we might not kind of know what hot
Mhm.
garbage smelled like because it's real hot here. So,
Mhm.
but I mean, like rotting flesh or just,
Mhm.
decomposing. It was just an awful, awful, awful smell. And
Uh,
that smell was persistent. It didn't matter what
oh.
I did to try to get rid
Mhm.
of it. And if you smelled something to try, sometimes you're like, oh, I'll
Mhm.
burn a candle or I'll spray some. That also smelled like that. So
Okay.
it just made it worse.
Well, and so I guess for me, like from the patient impact, clearly, like at any point, you're always like, I'm always smelling this. I'm always smelling cigarettes. Or I can't eat.
Yeah.
How did that affect you?
So it's interesting. The effect on me was I
Mhm.
noticed that sweet things or
Mhm.
like I lived on buttered noodles probably for 2 years. And so
Okay.
for me, I've experienced pretty tremendous weight gain,
Okay.
but a lot of people who have a similar
Uh-huh.
issue have experienced massive weight loss. And so we're
Okay.
seeing a lot of fluctuation of weight basically.
Mhm.
But because the thing that sustained me was
Buttered noodles.
better noodles, which
Uh-huh.
is, fat and
Uh-huh.
carbs, which is, and a complete lack of nutrition in general, because
Right. You couldn't
it was
handle the other
it
things.
was really hard to get
Mhm.
through, and things that
Mhm.
I loved, like I would eat spinach all the time or broccoli. I'm like, I
Uh-huh.
was really, really good at, eating
Mhm.
vegetables because I enjoyed them.
Mhm.
That's what I enjoyed eating. And I couldn't get through that stuff anymore.
Okay.
And it's such an interesting question because I started seeing a psychologist because I'm like, the psychology of this is just so bizarre.
Uh-huh.
How come if even if buttered noodles, they're not quite right. They weren't as bad as
Mm.
rotting garbage, but they still
Okay.
weren't quite right.
Right.
Why can't I force myself to go back to the
To
vegetables
like
and
the
eat?
spinach and the stuff.
And I think the psychology of it is you're just looking to be satiated, and we talk about
Mhm.
comfort foods, right? So you're
Right.
looking to feel comfortable. And if at that moment that's what's comfortable, that's what you're going to go to. And so
Right.
that was my tendency to just kind of go to those foods. And,
Mhm.
so now I'm kind of, the pendulum's going the other way and I'm trying to work myself back into those things, but just focusing on the psychology of it. Like, this is comfortable. This is comfortable, repeating mantras and just trying to get myself back into a space where I'm maintaining good nutrition.
How are vegetables then? Like, do they still taste funky? Do you still feel that? Like, where are you at with that?
No, they're really bad.
Okay.
So today for lunch, I had some celery sticks and carrot sticks,
Mhm.
but I had a few, like just trying to like dip my toe
Okay.
back in. I had a piece of raw broccoli and it was pretty garbagey, but
Uh-huh.
I just keep reminding myself like I want to feel better.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like it's probably a cyclical issue. Like if I'm not nourishing my body and giving myself,
Yeah.
healthy foods,
Mhm.
then your body can't repair itself. And
So if you can't repair, then you're just like going in
exactly.
that cycle.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
like I said, right now, because I am dealing with allergies and I'm tail end of a sinus infection, I slid backwards, and
Okay.
probably about 50% of what I was, 30 to 50, depending, how
Mhm.
bad my allergies
Right.
are. But I don't know if this is something that, for the rest of my life, just every time I get a cold or,
You're
something
gonna
that's
have a
going to slide backwards, or if it's something that I will, you know, finally reach 100%
Mhm.
better. I don't know.
Well, and the hard part with that is because again, COVID is a virus, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just like any other virus, sometimes they just kind of hide in your system, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
does make sense that if you have a stressor or a reaction that you have a flare up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ideally, obviously, it will continue to like improve and then, but again, it feels like because I've looked in the support groups and the things like that,
Mm-hmm.
and people have tried so many things. But it also looks like nobody knows. Like
Mhm,
obviously, like because I'm a nerd. So I went and did all the research and I was like,
mhm,
okay, so these are the cranial nerves that affect these things like taste and smell.
mhm,
So it's like these four cranial nerves that are kind of that thing. So would you then target that? But it feels like, so I was curious, like, so what were some of the wacky things that you tried, or what are some of the things that you've seen as treatments that people have been doing out there?
So the number one thing that people keep telling me is it's just time. And one thing that, and nobody wants to hear this, is I had a very prominent ENT I saw tell me that after about a year, that's about where you are. That's about as good as you're going to get.
Okay.
And I have seen changes after a year. So I still feel hopeful that that's not, the final answer. But for the most part, most people say it's just time will tell. But the less invasive things I've tried are chiropractic care. I've tried smell training, which
like a desensitization thing, or
so they just said the way they explained it to me was to just get things that are very familiar and easily identifiable, like, and to maybe use oils, like natural oils, because those will have like a really strong scent and they're easily accessible. You could put the cap on them if they're, so I went through lavender and lemon oil and some peppermint, some of the things that were common, smells that were easily recognizable and strong scents. So I did a lot of smell training at the beginning. Like I said, chiropractic care. I did ozone treatments. So I did where they take your blood out and they hyperoxygenate it and put it back. I did that. And then I did ozone directly into my nostrils, which was incredibly uncomfortable.
Where did you do that with?
I did that with a naturopath here in Phoenix. I've done therapy. I've done acupuncture. I've done Reiki treatments. I mean, you name it, I've done it. There was even if you've probably seen through the support groups, they're like, hey, if you try this thing, like where you burn an orange and then you put it in a paper bag and like these ridiculous kind of like wives' tale things. I don't want to say ridiculous because some people said it worked for them. And if it worked, it worked, but
and everybody's different.
Yeah. But there was one where they said, if you flick the back of your head right at the right place, like with the right like speed of, so my sister-in-law spent the entire Thanksgiving, just flicking the back of my head. And I was like, I wanted to pretend like, oh, stop, that's annoying. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, no, do it harder. Cause maybe that's the thing.
Right. I mean, and you're probably letting like a little level of desperation.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. I did cuttlefish pills was a recommendation. So I did that. I've tried, I mean, anything, if it weren't very, dangerous or invasive, I think probably the most dangerous and invasive thing I did was the ozone therapy. And that was, the hyperoxygenation of the blood, that was pretty invasive, but I didn't really feel it. It was just kind of sitting there, letting them. She took out my blood and then she put the ozone and put it back in. And I felt a lot of energy after that. But after that, when I did the ozone in my nose, that was so painful and really, really uncomfortable. And just for the probably next week, it was just constant runny nose and my eyes burned. And I want to say I felt better afterwards, but I didn't long-term see much of an effect after that.
Now, when you said therapy, like a physical therapy scenario or like
mental health?
Mental health. Because of course, automatically I perk up on like therapy. What did they do with you? So
no, probably the closest to physical therapy I've done, like I said, is the chiropractic. But because I started feeling like until it's gone, you don't realize how much you depend on your smell. I started to feel unsafe. Like something's burning and this is where I die because I cannot smell smoke. It always smells like that. I remember, I think I told you, I was boiling water one time and the pot wasn't directly over the fire properly and the silicone started to burn. I didn't tell the difference between that and the water that was boiling. They smell the same. And so it wasn't until I like saw the silicone burning where I'm like, well, I'm gonna die from this, like literally. So I started feeling like really crazy because I don't have that. That's a sense of security. It's kind of a sense of, like comfort when you go home. You're like, oh, this is Thanksgiving when it smells like at my mom's house. And you don't have that anymore. Like, so I literally started feeling crazy. Absolutely nuts.
Well, and that's also like, those are tied to memory. So so it's interesting because we always say like, the sense is like obviously visual and hearing, right? It just ties in a huge thing. But you sometimes don't always think about taste and smell because you're like, oh, okay, whatever. But then you don't realize how much you've actually depended on that or how much that links into stuff like memory stuff for you. Or again, like I wouldn't have even thought about like, oh, I can't smell smoke or I can't smell this or I can't, like, this would alert me to a danger, right?
Oh yeah. or rotten food, because everything smells rotten. What's the first thing you do? You're like, oh, is this milk rotten? You go to smell it. Well, if it always smells rotten, how do you know?
Right. So you can protect yourself in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that kind of leads into, like if you go into the support groups, you might have seen where we talk about safe foods all the time, or there are just some things where, like mine was butter noodles. I always knew if I had buttered noodles, that was safe because I knew it didn't smell quite right. But it's such an innocuous thing. It's not like there's, I'm not eating raw fish. I'm not eating, meat. Is it cooked well? Or, like it was a pretty innocuous thing. So if it wasn't cooked all the way through, I'm not going to die. If the butter got left out on the counter, I'm not going to die. It's fine. And that was part of it. Like just feeling like it's not going to be moldy. That it's safe.
Well, and I know even for you, like, we had a yoga class where there were more people.
Oh, yes.
And so then I know that you had a reaction because there were more scents and just that kind
there were more scents, and there was something that somebody close to me, I don't know if it was like a body wash or a hair product or something that and again, this was a couple months ago. So this was 2.5 years into this at least, right? And I'm thinking, oh yeah, I'm feeling better. And normally we go to yoga, there's 10, maybe 15 people, 20,
but we're like space,
yeah, it's plenty of space between us. But this class, there was like 40 something people.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people in class, and yeah, it was just too much. And whatever I think she was right next to me, but it was just too much. And I was just so mad. I just sat outside, and I didn't know what to do. I was just sitting there, and tears were coming out. Someone was like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm totally fine." Do I sit here and explain this to them, or do I just wallow in my crazy?
Well, and that's the hard part, because in your head, you probably feel crazy.
I felt so crazy. And then I was mad because I left my shoes in the class and I couldn't even leave.
So you had to wait for the oh, that's terrible. I didn't even realize that. Oh my God. Okay.
I would have gone home, but it was 125 degrees. So I would walk on the pavement.
That's terrible. Okay. So I didn't realize that part. So as your friend, I'm like, good luck, like.
Oh no, you were so sweet. And I felt comfortable to tell you because I had shared that experience before. So if I looked at you and I'm like, I have to leave because it smells bad, like you knew it wasn't a personal issue or anything like that. So and I apologize, I'm dealing with allergies, so my eyes.
No, you're totally fine. I was like, all the things, but well, and then I was gonna say, like, can you spell out the two different conditions in case people wanted to look them up?
Yeah, so parosmia, it's phonetic, Parosmia.
Okay.
And that one is the distorted smell. So there's just kind of like an underlying distortion of, and again, these are all things you don't really think about when you're just in a state of, normal, just hanging out, living your life. There's still a smell, but you become nose blind to like whatever's in your nose that you're smelling. And so maybe it's like something in your nose that's causing the distortion. I don't really know what it is, but there's just a constant distortion of smell. And even when you smell things, outside of that kind of normal, just living your life smell, everything is off. Something's off.
Well, and it's almost, there are like things. So with certain conditions, like, you put on a piece of clothing, right? And then after a while, you don't feel it necessarily, unless you've got like a weird tag stabbing you, right?
Yeah.
So most people process that and they acknowledge it and their body moves on. But some people don't, like they just keeps there. So there's certain conditions, a lot of times, like with autism or things like that, they keep feeling it. So there's a sensory issue and so I feel like this is just another form of that, but now it's scent. Or it's like being able to smell. So now it's something with that, like whatever happened with that virus that's attacked this particular area. So you weren't able to process that stuff and have it, so it's kind of interesting, but also I think that so many people were, and again, obviously, like we don't want people dying or whatever, but so many people were so focused on like the respiratory symptoms or the weakness that sometimes you don't realize that. But again, when I looked in those groups, I'm like, there are so many people affected.
So many people, and because it's such a personal thing, that it might be very different. There, like I said, there are common things. A lot of us reported smelling cigarette smoke. A lot of us report the garbage. Like so, it's very so. There are some similar experiences, but then depending on all the things that make us individuals, those things could affect it too. So the parosmia is the distortion, and then the anosmia is the complete loss of the smell, which is anosmia. And I
Okay.
think that's less common than the prosmia. So you'll see
Okay.
the shared experience is probably more of the distortion
Okay.
of smells. But again, because smell is about 80% of what you taste.
Then you're not able to taste the food.
Yeah.
You're also
So
not able to detect things, or it's just I
mhm.
mean, it's that debate. Would it be better not to smell anything at all versus being stuck with this terrible smell that's like
Yeah.
haunting you? Or
Well, and we've had that conversation. It's an interesting thought exercise because
Mhm.
for some people, this has been pretty miserable for me, and I'm still
Mhm.
grateful that it's not as bad as some people have experienced. Like I said, some people have experienced weight loss to the point of hospitalization, and that's what put them in the
Mhm.
hospital, not the COVID. They could have been
Right.
asymptomatic, but the things they're suffering
They can't
after
eat.
COVID, yeah,
Mhm.
they just can't eat. And, luckily I probably had a really unhealthy relationship with food where I'm kind of an overeater in
Mhm.
general, and I had managed that to a point. But because I think I have that just
Mhm.
underlying, like that for me, I think is what's gotten me
Mhm.
through. So it's kind of, like I said, just relearning to manage these things with the way it is. I think I'm getting to the point where I'm just accepting like this is probably as good as it's gonna
Mhm.
get, and I probably will have situations like I'm experiencing right now where I've backslid a little bit, and
Right.
you know, it is what it is.
Well, and it's so I'll ask you probably just probably like so from since it is state of healthcare, right, that we're talking
Mhm.
about, how was your experience when you went to the doctors? I'm sure a lot of them probably were almost as lost as you were because they probably were like, "What?" You
Yeah.
know?
Well, a lot of them were kind of lost, and they kind of
Mhm.
say, "Oh yeah, I've heard of this a little," or they'd
Mhm.
say it's not totally uncommon in viral
Mhm.
situations or head injuries, or there's certain things that can kind of trigger this. So it's not new, but it just wasn't so common that people weren't spending a lot of time and effort on studying it or remedying it.
Right.
And so I went to an ear, nose, throat doctor who was
Mhm.
recommended to me by my primary care doctor. And she's the one that was like, it's just time. But, I know somebody who does studies if you wanted to
Mhm.
try to get into a study. So I did try to get in the study. That one was full, but I knew I felt hopeful from that because there are so many people coming out of COVID with it,
Right.
that there are healthcare professionals maybe that are paying a little bit more attention to it.
Mhm. Right.
And and so that's the best I've kind of gotten from healthcare professionals. I haven't had anyone that said, yeah, this is something we can
Mhm.
do a treatment for, or here's a pill, or here's
Okay.
they just said try these things. It might work, it might not. I don't
Mhm.
know.
But I also feel like for COVID, there were so many people like, to be honest, healthcare was not ready, or
Right.
there's that whole debate
Yeah.
of like so I feel like unfortunately that has continued. But wasn't there was a doctor, was it like in Texas that was doing injections or something?
Yeah, so there is a doctor, and it's I think called a ganglion blocker. And so
Mhm.
I'm not super familiar with it because that's not something that I tried, but a lot of
Uh-huh.
people were trying it's like uh an implant in your neck, I think on either side of
Mhm.
your neck. And I think it just, from what I understand, it blocks the
Book.
transmission of something in your nerves.
Okay.
And some people were seeing
Mhm.
success with it and some people weren't.
Okay.
So that was another crapshoot. I just think because it's such a personal thing,
Mhm.
like I said, with all the things that make us individuals, like you just kind of never know what's going to work. But some people were seeing good success with that. And
Okay.
some people saw success for a short period of time and then went right
Mhm.
back. So,
Well, and so talk to me about how, because you were talking about yoga of like trying to get back into like being okay
mhm,
with your body
mhm.
and that kind of like how was that helpful with your journey or where was that?
So for me, I
Mhm.
I walked all the time, but I live
Mhm.
in downtown, and so there were a lot of smells in
Yes.
downtown. So even walking became hard for me because
Uh,
if I walked by a restaurant and I would gag, I would just, well, I mean, I couldn't
mhm.
stand the smell of what the hot air was coming out of the kitchen or
Right.
whatever. So even walking became hard for me because of
Mhm.
all of the ambient smells were too much. So I just had to find something that I liked that helped
Uh,
remind me to move my body. And I
okay.
mean, this might be what my body looks like for the rest of my life. I mean, I'm trying to not let that be the case because I don't know that it's healthy and I'm not always comfortable. But if this is how it is, this is how it is. And so I just kind of started telling myself I need to figure out how to get outside of my head where I'm like not beating
Mhm.
myself up and not, I just have to figure out how to live like this for now. And then
Mhm.
once I felt like once I calmed my mind a little bit, like I'll get back into it. I'll get back to where I was and find the thing that I love that will help me move. And, like I'll get back into it. So it was partly just figuring out how to move my body again
Mhm.
and in a safe space where I didn't feel like smells were going to come at me
Right.
and
Okay.
make me feel like
Uh-huh.
discouraged or overwhelmed,
Mhm.
or, because you saw it, like
Yeah.
you've seen me every day when I'm not overwhelmed, and then that one day when I
Mhm.
was, and you can kind of see like it's just a mind trip.
Mhm.
So it was that, and then also just like the meditative aspect of it, just trying to
Mhm.
calm my mind because of how you just kind of feel unsafe, and you feel, like I said, you
Mhm.
feel, just things are so different, and the way you're kind of moving around in the world absent a sense that's really important, it's kind of
Mhm.
hard. So calming my mind a little bit, and just, so those are the things that I've really gained from yoga, and
Right.
I've stuck with it. It's the first thing I've stuck with for, since, like I said, I just started back at the yoga studio in April of this year.
Okay.
I've done pretty well. I haven't really missed a lot of classes, but it's the first thing in the last 3 years that's made me feel motivated and wanted me to go do
Uh-huh.
something.
Good. Well, and also then that's how I met you. So yay.
Yeah, I know exactly.
So,
That's a super duper plus.
right, it's a bright side, but also like it is hard. So when you said that one, and it's nothing at any of the doctors, but when you said where they're like, well, this is probably as good as it gets, and that's kind of the thing you have to do, the cover your butt thing in
Yeah.
healthcare. But when I was in PT school, they always said 6 months after a stroke is as good as a person's going to be.
Hmm.
But I've seen so many people make more changes.
Oh yeah.
So I tend to be more of what I may be an optimist of whatever, but I tend to think that the human body can continue to like do these repairs and based on kind of the input that it receives. So on a level, I'm glad you found like a way to like have movement or try to
Hmm.
like that you don't give up, that you just keep kind of like you'll have a setback and then so.
Yeah, I do try to remain hopeful. And I probably maybe should have shared this at the beginning, but when I was a kid, I was pretty sick, and I actually had brain surgery, and I had
Mm.
arthroscopic brain surgery through my sinus cavity.
Oh,
So
shoot.
I think in my head, I kind of
Uh,
probably maybe was
mhm.
predisposed to this a little bit. And
Right.
again, saying again how we're all
Uh-huh.
on our own individual journey. This might be as good as it gets, and it
Uh-huh.
might have something to do with that. And maybe there's something in
Mhm.
my journey that will make it better. I don't know, but
Right.
I just kind of have always. That was another thing about yoga where I was trying to reconcile that, where I'm
Mhm.
just like mad from all those things coming up again, where I'm like, I
Mhm.
didn't ever get a chance to just be like a healthy person. 'Cause I
Right.
started out like that, and so just trying to
Mhm.
reconcile those things a little bit. So maybe it is as good as it's gonna get, but
Mhm.
I just still need to focus on positive things and be grateful that it's not worse.
Well, and then I guess if you had any piece of advice you could offer someone who is like, I'm still experiencing COVID things, or I've had this loss of sense of taste or
Mhm.
smell, or they're kind of say that someone just starting on that journey, or someone who's been on that but doesn't
Mhm.
know, like, what would you say to them?
I would
Mhm.
say focus on mindfulness and just
Mhm.
really don't discredit the
Mhm.
power of your mind.
Mhm.
And if you can get to that point where you're strong enough and you can sit down and say like, this broccoli is delicious. This broccoli is
Uh-huh.
delicious, and like really focus on mind over matter and calming
Uh-huh.
your mind and reminding
Mhm.
yourself that, you're okay. And, so those things that we focus on in mindfulness, I think that's probably been the most helpful thing to me, just because, like I said, you just feel like you're starting to go crazy. So if you can calm your mind and keep your mind focused
Mhm.
on things that are helpful to you versus are not helpful to you, then I think that's probably the most healthy thing that I've managed over the
To
last
do.
3 years.
Okay.
So I would say first and foremost, the mindfulness, and then, you know, this isn't something I've been able to do alone. I've had to
Mhm.
ask for help. I mean, down to the asking my boyfriend 10 times a day, can you smell this? Is this fine? Can you smell? What does
Right.
that smell? What does that smell
Uh-huh.
constantly? And so just knowing that this isn't something you can get through on your own. And so really depend on other people and find, the people that you trust.
Because you said his wasn't as bad, and so he never ended up with any of these type of symptoms.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, even though we got it at the exact same time, we had the same strain. We had,
Uh,
I do
mhm.
think that I had a little bit worse during the time I was
Mhm.
sick.
Mhm.
But he in general had a much milder case, but neither one of us had a really terrible
Mhm.
case. I think I had like more persistent, like my symptoms were a little bit longer. He
Okay.
was kind of sick for maybe a week, and I was sick for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So maybe it was because it was persistent. And
Uh-huh.
I've also read and seen that women tend to have worse COVID symptoms than
Oh,
men.
interesting. Okay.
And had worse effects after the COVID shots. The vaccines affected
Oh.
them more negatively. And so maybe it's just a gender
Uh-huh.
thing too. I think maybe hormonally,
That's interesting.
so
I'd never,
yeah.
I guess I don't know. I'm like, I hadn't heard that, but now part of me is like, gotta go explore that symptom. So women tend, and so is that, I mean, I've been in the groups, but do you feel like it is more predominantly women in the group then?
I do believe it's more women that I
Mhm.
see. And maybe that's because I gravitate towards that. But
Mm.
again, I'm not a professional in
Yeah,
this.
I won't be like quoting your research on
No,
it.
my experience
This is your
is
personal experience.
yeah, it's my
Yes.
personal experience. And then also just
Mhm.
some of the healthcare professionals I've seen have said
Mhm.
that because I've experienced other things after COVID that I've never really had, like really
Mhm.
horrible cramps during my menstrual cycle and things that
Okay.
just I know are different after COVID. And so
Uh-huh.
every doctor I go to, I mention it just because I'm like, have you heard of this?
Yeah.
Is this something you know about? So even like
Mhm.
my OB or whatever, and across the board, what I've been told is that typically women are seeing worse effects of COVID than men.
Interesting.
So
Uh,
that's
Not to super pry, but if you feel comfortable. So the cramps, obviously,
this.
but are there, you said there were some other symptoms besides that, like,
Yeah, those are probably the worst of it,
okay.
but symptoms of those things have
Right.
been
Okay.
bad sleep and bad eating habits, and
Uh-huh.
so it's just one thing after another that I'm trying
Uh-huh.
to
Okay.
refocus and
Right.
and get better. But
Mhm.
yeah, that it just
That's interesting. Okay.
COVID has not been kind to a lot of people.
Right. Okay.
And again, like I said, it's a shared experience that I have
Mhm.
with a lot of people. And
Right.
I'm surprised at the number of people who don't know about this, considering the number of
Mhm.
people that have it.
Right. Well, and that's actually, I'm as naive as I'm going to sound from when you first introduced it. I was like, what? Like, I have heard of the things and people's taste and smell taking a while to return, but I hadn't heard of and it makes sense. And then, of course, after I talked to you, then I fell in like a research hole of like looking into the stuff and
Mhm.
looking at the groups and things like that, just because I was like, oh my gosh. And then there are obviously, but people don't, I feel like people don't talk about it. Like, if you're not in one of those groups or if you're not
Mhm.
seeing that stuff or you're not affected, I feel like people don't talk about that so
Mhm.
much. Like I hear you feel these other things on COVID or blood stuff or respiratory or whatever, but I feel like people don't necessarily ever address this.
I agree with that. And I think because the immediate need to fix it isn't there. It's not like a respiratory issue. If you have a
Mhm.
respiratory issue and you're struggling to breathe, that's a big time problem. You got to take care
Right.
of that real quick.
Uh-huh.
Not being able to smell is
Mhm.
not immediately detrimental. I'm not
Mhm.
going to die from not being able to smell my food properly,
Mhm.
right? Like it doesn't smell right. But long term, it is
Mhm.
detrimental. And I would say, we talk all the time about mental health care in our
Mhm.
country. I mean, these are things that are affecting our mental health care. I felt like I was going crazy. I was probably making
Mhm.
people around me crazy by
Mhm.
constantly saying, like, what does this smell like? What does that smell? What do
Uh-huh.
you
Right.
like
No, but that,
constantly?
well, and I think also that is part of it. Like we address kind of the mental health component of like
Mhm.
isolation and the quarantine,
Mhm.
but also maybe not so much like what happened to people who had COVID or had these things, or I feel like there is a huge thing of
Mhm.
that's maybe under the radar that people are suffering with, but
Mhm.
haven't had it addressed.
And I would say too
Mhm.
that I think that more holistically, I think like just
Mhm.
for example, last weekend I sat at a benefit dinner. I sat across from an optometrist and next to an orthodontist.
Oh.
Not two people that would typically handle any COVID symptoms, but I feel
Uh-huh.
like in general, because the entire medical community was affected so much by COVID
Mhm.
that the entire medical community, I'm just always surprised, how
Uh-huh.
many people don't know about this. And I'm
Right.
thinking in my head, well, maybe the orthodontist, that's a stretch, but an ophthalmologist, and I might be saying he's a doctor.
Uh-huh.
So I might be saying it wrong,
Right.
but I forget if it's ophthalmologist but anyways, he, I'm now suffering from nutrition issues, and that's
Right.
obviously detrimental to my eyesight. So I've noticed like I bet you anything when I go in for my exam at the end of the
Right.
year, I
Uh-huh.
need a new prescription because I can feel how different my eyesight is.
Oh, wow.
Could that be age? Could it be effective COVID? Could
Mhm.
it be, yeah, all those things are possible. But I know for a fact where I was last year and where I am this year are very different places. So
Mhm.
I'm very vocal and I tell all of my healthcare professionals, like, this is what I'm
Mhm.
dealing with. This is what's going on. And I'm surprised at the number of them who are like just hearing about it for the first time.
Right. So I'm not alone, but it also makes me sad. So, but I appreciate that you're actually open with your practitioners, and I hope they're actually open to like hearing your things.
They have been very open, and I do think I've probably gotten the most reaction from my my naturopath.
Okay.
And I think that might be because, just in full transparency, my insurance won't pay for her. And so she has the freedom to just kind of do whatever, test she wants to do. And when I sat down, she spent probably an hour going over, history, and, she asked me about previous viruses that I might have experienced. And when I was traveling through Asia, I got dengue fever, which is another virus. And that piqued her interest because she was like, well, maybe there's some effect, or there's something pulling from that, or, something kicked up some dust in your. So she went through and she tested that. And she's like, I've never even seen that under a microscope. Let's look at that and see what it looks like. And so I think by far she's probably been the most receptive and the most responsive. But I think that's because she's operating outside of the insurance, scheme. So that's just my personal assessment of it. But yeah, I still to this day, I go every 3 months and I get tested for different things, and she sits down and talks about a lot of stuff with me. And
it's interesting you say that, because it's saying that like she's operating under the insurance box, because I do feel like, so I do cash pay, and I do feel like it gives me the freedom to actually like treat what I want to treat, or treat like what I feel like would be the best for the patient, as terrible as it sounds. So
no, I agree. I think there's a lot to that. And I think, but I even told her, I kind of said, it doesn't really matter. I just need relief. So, that's one thing I have to say I'm very grateful, is that I have the resources to be able to do that, where there's a lot of people who don't, and might not be getting the same care from their doctors, or, people as receptive to, because like I said, when you go on the support groups and you look at the chats and you see people that think they're faking it, or, they're really not getting the support at home. They're not getting the support from healthcare professionals. So I can only imagine how hard that is. And again, talking about mindfulness and gratefulness, I'm grateful that I have a support system, and people have believed me, and I have the resources to be able to treat it.
Receptive professionals on it. So
exactly.
No, so I'm glad that's as terrible as it's been. I'm glad that's been your experience. So
for sure. And I'm sorry again.
No, you're totally fine. We're like speaking of all of the things.
All of the things.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time just to even talk about this, because I've grilled you so many times, and then all the stuff. And I thought it was just something interesting that people should hear about, because again, we hear about all these other symptoms and all these other things, and I feel like this is kind of one of those that's like under the radar, but there's a lot of people suffering. And maybe even if it doesn't fix it for somebody, even if you can just bring awareness and let people know that there's other people experiencing it too. Sometimes just the realizing you're not crazy.
Absolutely.
Is the first step of things.
Well, and people hearing you too. I've just always appreciated, I know you've been cautious to ask questions, or, grill me too much or whatever, but you being a healthcare professional and being aware of it and asking questions, I think is so helpful. And I appreciate that compassion. I appreciate that curiosity. Like you said, the more people that know about it and can treat people, I think is going to help people. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And again, so thank you, Anna, for coming and sharing your journey with us. And obviously I'm going to keep maintaining that, despite the sinus stuff right now, it's going to keep going, but hopefully we'll have some other good news to report in the future. But
for sure.
Again, so, I will kind of post a little bit of like underneath this. I'll also put like the name, so in case anybody wants to look it up, or if you are having any of those experiences, you can DM and I could send you to like kind of towards like direct you towards some of those groups and things like that. So we always want people to not feel alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I will say too is be your own advocate and ask a ton of questions. That's where I've learned most of my information. So I didn't mean to.
Oh, you're totally fine. Nope, that's perfect.
Advocating for yourself is so important, so perfect. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right. Goodbye. Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the State of Healthcare podcast. We hope that we were able to gain some valuable information, or at least some insight into what goes into some of these conditions from this patient's story. Again, please feel free to always share, Please follow us online at Better Fit Therapy. And again, if there's any conditions or things that we haven't addressed or that you might find interesting, you can always message us online and we'd be willing to investigate. But again, taking your own healthcare into your hands is probably the most important lesson that you can learn from this. So unfortunately, in the state of healthcare that we're in now, you do have to fight for the things that are important. We encourage you to take a more active role in your healthcare and be able to participate so that we can fix the system where we're at now. Thank you again and have a good day.